So Christianity has tried to figure out a way to restore its old picture, I guess, or its way of functioning, which depended so much on Jesus being the substance of God. That means Jesus came to restore a corrupt substance within us. Jesus is salvation. But if Jesus is not the substance of God, and if there really isn't a corrupt something in us, then there has to be other ways to try to express the great value and power of Christianity. And one of the ways is Neo-orthodoxy, which is a creation of the early 20th century, late 19th century. And the most famous, at least for me, although Joe knows another guy, is Karl Barth, because I'm Protestant, so I'm on that side of the equation. But Kaler, right, was the Roman Catholic guy? Martin Kaler? Yeah. I thought he was. No? Oh, I thought he was Catholic. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, Karl Barth was the most prominent that I know, because I was taught Barthian theology in seminary, and it was pounded into my head, and when I left seminary, I was a Barthian for sure, as many ministers are. And what you can do with it, what you can do with it is that you can recognize the world is mystery and wonderful and beautiful, but out of the mystery, God breaks into the world as the Word. And so the Word of God is the prophetic voice of Christianity against culture. So that's what's powerful about Neo-orthodoxy. And you have great examples of that power in American history, and I'm going to touch on one. So here it gets political again, just a warning. But I think you could argue that the 9/11 event here, a horrendous event, massive sympathy around the world. I don't know of a moment after that day when there weren't so many people who were very caring and compassionate and loving of the U.S. and the American people and that event. So there was tremendous goodwill expressed, but also beyond just goodwill, there was a great empathy sharing of the tragedy internationally. But I think in light of that tragedy, unfortunately, there was a certain decision-making process in place with the government of that time that used that tragedy, I think wrongly, to justify invading Iraq, and played on the feeling, the common feeling of revenge. We want revenge, which is a natural feeling when something like that happens. Of course it is. So there was this great cultural temptation to seek revenge by invading Iraq, where the problem didn't really lie. The problem lay in Afghanistan, and in particularly northern Afghanistan and Pakistan. So it was very tough. And to use those feelings for an agenda that became different. Now, there were theologians at that time who were Neo-orthodox theologians and who spoke out against that and were accused of being traitors and who were silenced with this overwhelming birth of patriotism. And a good Neo-orthodox theologian would say that it's the responsibility of a Christian theologian to hold that prophetic voice of criticism, to hold a culture and a nation to think before it acts, and to think about what's happening, and to ask if it's really the will of God. And now I've got an example of this. In the Vietnam War, this is what one of the famous Neo-orthodox theologians of the United States of America, named Martin Luther King Jr., had to say. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, You are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Now, that's a Neo-orthodox theologian. Powerful prophet. And that's the overwhelming and unbelievable stirring power of that theology. Martin Luther King Jr. said that in a sermon called Why I'm Opposed to the Vietnam War, preached at Ebenezer Baptist Church on April the 30th, 1967. So now here's the problem, though, with Neo-orthodox theology. And that is, it has a lot of voices. So you do have a Martin Luther King Jr., but you also have a George Bush Jr., who will claim that I'm doing the Word of God and God's service. And you have to judge, well, who's the voice? Which one really is the voice of God? And now nominalism can step in and say something like this: the difference has to be a reasoned standard of justice and not revelation. You can't just say, God's given me a revelation, and go about saying whatever you think is what it is. Why? Because when we read that Word of God, we will do so according to the rhetorical habit that we've been taught. And we need something more than that. We need to use a standard of justice, a standard of reason, and we need to rely more on our abilities to discern than on our cultural habits.